Chapter 201 Teamwork vs Bashing by Hydesgrain. With 8 beasts in front of them, 4 heavy armored mountain bears, and 4 green windwalker bears in total. All of the bears in front of them were at the low, mid-unblemished rank, and the green windwalker bears possessed a strong wind affinity, turning their body slimmer, causing them to be faster, while the heavy armored mountain bears didn't have an affinity. While they say that the death transmuted mana radiating from the skeletons was an advantage in this case because it forcefully attracted all bears to charge towards them. It was as if they taunted them, causing Jason to nod in admiration before he stepped back another few steps. Is that their strategy? He wondered, as he saw the Nightmare Horse and Malia attacking the bears with long-range elemental spells, while Jennifer did the same with her bow. Meanwhile, the Shadow Panthers seemed to vanish within the surrounding shadows while Lyn and his Treant Soulbond controlled the vines and roots all around in order to hinder the 8 unblemished bears charged towards them. Uprooting several meter-long roots that were tight wide, they coiled around the bears' legs, only to be ripped apart by the massive strength behind the bears' charge, which fortunately slowed them down by a small margin. Meanwhile, Lux prepared himself, circulating the mana within him in order to activate his movement technique when he ordered the skeleton archer to shoot the bear's vital spots, while the warrior was supposed to stall time. Lux and the skeleton assassin charged forward, passing the warrior, and it seemed as if they were faster than the heavy armored mountain bears, causing the two of them to evade their attacks easily. Theo decided to take care of the green windwalker bears, with Jennifer and the 2 peak-evolved Shadow Panthers' help. Because the bears' attention was focused on the undead beings, the others had a very easy time surviving, while Malia and her Nightmare Horse shot dozens of fireballs one after another on a single heavy armored mountain bears, that was shaken out of the bewitching hostile feeling against the undead being in front of him, as it smelled burning flesh with searing pain passing through its whole body. Looking down, multiple holes with burned flesh and bones sticking out could be seen, which caused the injured bear to widen its eyes as its strength slowly dissipating, when a compressed water jet pierced one of the holes within its chest. Slowing down, the other 7 bears continued to charge, while their brethren made its last steps, looking longingly at its compared that was still alive. Isn't she consuming too much mana? Jason wondered as he continued to observe the whole battle, which seemed to proceed extremely weirdly. If Jason wasn't a complete fool, it seemed like Lux didn't care a tiny bit about his soulbonds, because the skeleton warrior and archer were beating up and their bone limbs ripped apart, while he focused on a single opponent with the skeleton assassin next to him. However, Jason noticed something new, and it seemed as if the skeleton warrior and archer that were ripped apart didn't lose a single bit of their mana fluctuations, while their core still shone brightly, as his eyes widened. Are undead beings immortal? He wondered, and the mana core with the sealed soul within had to be the reason, because of the vast mana fluctuation, held everything forceful together. While 3 bears bashed up the 2 skeletons, Jennifer already shot multiple arrows, injuring the bears' knees, which slowed them down, while Lyn used his affinity together with his Treant in order to decrease their speed further by uprooting more thick roots that coiled around their feet, chaining them up. At the same time, Theo stood behind one of the green windwalker bears with his longsword pulled back, cleaving down, severing one limb without much obstruction, as the Shadow Panthers stealthily approached the unaware bears before they pounced at them, to inflicting more injuries at their already seriously injured legs. With their legs almost completely crippled, the heavy armored mountain bears could barely do anything against the expedition team with the numerical advantage, as the green windwalker bears summoned a strong draft around them, with dozens of wind spears manifesting around them, which they shot out, without caring about anything at all. Barely evading one wind spear that flew towards him, Jason was fortunate that he could perceive the mana fluctuation before anyone else thanks to his mana eyes. Meanwhile, Lyn's Treant was pierced by a few spears, while the others evaded or deflected the spears. A Treant could survive something like that without problems due to its exceptional regeneration ability, and the whole battle ended a minute later with Theo severing the last green windwalker bear's head. The only casualties they faced were the skeleton warrior and archer, while they radiated the thick death transmuted mana, attracting their bones that laid all around the small battlefield. Jason noticed a few bite marks on the bones that gathered around the skeleton's mana core, as they were drawn back to their original position. Won't their combat prowess decrease if the bite marks deepen further if they don't heal? He wondered as he noticed the dense death mana within the skeleton mana core enveloping the damaged bones as if they wanted to heal them. Suddenly, he perceived tiny changes and the bone marks seemed to regenerate slowly, which caused him to look at the bite marks more intently. Interesting. While the others stored the bear corpses in their spatial rings, Jason continued to observe the skeleton's healing process, before he noticed Malia standing next to him. "It's creepy, right?" she said, slightly disgusted before she noticed Jason shaking his head. "It's really interesting. How can they heal so fast?" he said, wondering about the fast healing process these skeletons accomplished solely through their mana core. Lux stood not far from them and heard Jason, and what the youth said, caused him to lift his eyebrows because it was the first time for someone to say something like this when they saw his skeleton's healing process. Most students and even teachers at his school were disgusted by this ability, and they found his fighting style even cruder because he sacrificed his slower skeletons in order to finish his opponents. However, there was not really a perfect way to use the skeleton warrior in a better way, because its innate intelligence is restricted to the bare minimum, while controlling him perfectly to allow him to use martial art techniques was too taxing. As such, he used a sacrifice tactic almost every time he fought, with the skeleton warrior as the tank, his archer as a means to slow down his opponent while he and the skeleton assassin would take care of the rest. In addition, the constant radiating death mana would always attract the hostility of beasts, causing other tactics to be useless, as long as he didn't have enough soul bonds to take care of larger beast tides. Jason found the tactic used by Lux crude but efficient, as long as his soul bonds survived, because undead couldn't feel pain, which was also an important factor within the plan. But he was more astonished about the others' teamwork, as everyone focused their attacks on vital points in order to slow down the bear's charge, while the vines and roots seemingly ended the fight. Without being able to move freely, the bears could be compared to training puppets or targets, causing Jason to feel almost pity for them. Chapter 202 Outskirts by Hydesgrain. When the group of 6 gathered, Jason wondered how everyone's distribution would look like. The only thing their small group really clarified was that everyone would receive shares according to their contribution. As such, he doubted that he would obtain anything from any beast they killed, even though he would be the reason for the expedition team to prevent meeting any large groups or stronger beasts if possible. If he didn't need their protection, Jason would have already retaliated, but that was unfortunately the case. However, once he found a treasure, he would obtain a piece of the cake. In the end, Jason's plan did not rely on his team's share, and he wanted to do something else if possible. But to do this, he had to know more about his surroundings, while Artemis next to him was slightly problematic. While waiting for his soul energy to reach Artemis' demand in order to let her rest inside his soul world, he had to wait, which was extremely frustrating, because relying on strangers and Malia was not something Jason liked. Unfortunately, he couldn't change this matter for now and was forced to do exactly what he didn't want to do. Trusting strangers with his life on the line. What if there was a dispute about some treasures or how to distribute them? Did everyone trust each other so much to think that they wouldn't be betrayed? In the last few months, Jason already witnessed 2 large beast tides and humanity's selfishness, which was not something to be proud of, and it caused him to be more careful with his demands. But only after Old Drake's words he understood that he acted naively in telling others about his mana eyes with its special characteristics. Right now, he had Shane to rely on, but what if other big clans from Khania were to search him because of his ability to detect high-potential beasts? Could Shane really save him from every danger around him? Definitely not, and Jason wanted to become stronger, the faster the better, and he could only do so by venturing through the valley, alone at best, without Artemis or anyone else. This was only thanks to the concealment technique he memorized throughout the last few days, and Jason was already able to suppress his mana fluctuations to a certain degree, while some at his rank or one stage above should not be able to clearly determine his strength if they were to focus on him. With this, he could at least walk through the outskirts of the valley, without any unblemished beast caring about his existence. Why would an unblemished beast care about a living being with weak mana fluctuations at the Adept, Awakened rank? If these beasts were not starving for months, everything should be fine. Once the group decided where to go, Lin walked towards the torn-apart Forest Guardian with a sad expression as he said, "If only my second soul bond would be a Forest Guardian." Sighing, he stored it away, before he turned back to the expedition group, that silently nodded its head. Forest Guardians were special existences, and their most special feature was its mana core. They lived within a small society with less than 10 individuals while their race, form, size, and potential varied, with most Forest Guardians being humanoid beasts with veins, leaves, and moss covering them, while they had thick horns on their forehead. Most of them looked elegant, but that was less important because their mana core could be described to be life itself. Not only was their mana core extremely complex and with thin intersections connected, but the transmuted mana within its mana core was able to regenerate severed limbs, diseases, and severe injuries. Alone through this ability, Forest Guardians were seen as extremely valuable soul bonds not many humans had, while newborn Forest Guardians were an even rarer sight, because of their low fertility rate. In the end, Jason also wanted such a soul bond, because a healing ability was always helpful, but the main issue was that his soul energy was too low, while he had more than enough soul bonds to take care of for the moment. If nothing serious would happen, Scorpio would finish his evolution soon, while Artemis would become even stronger without him knowing what rank her current race could reach. "Well, I can think of these problems later," Jason told himself, as he led their small expedition team around the outskirts close to their plateau, while carefully avoiding larger beast groups. They made a lunch break to ease their tension, in which Jason practiced the Heaven's Hell 3rd level, increasing his soul energy by a large margin, while the others absorbed mana, ate something, or talked about the ancient ruins. Fighting many smaller beast groups, Jason began to notice an important synergy between a few members. While Jennifer and Theo trusted each other completely, Lin seemed to be the one who was the closest to Lux. Malia was friendly with all of them, but somehow Jason thought she was alone, causing him to walk towards her in order to talk with her. He trusted Malia the most from the group and from their small dispute earlier at the Highland Plateau. He also knew that Jennifer and Lin were rather greedy, while Theo acted level-headed. The only one he couldn't understand at all was Lux, who went along with everything the others said as if it had nothing to do with him. It was uncomfortable to look into his eyes, but when Jason stared into them intently, there was a feeling more than discomfort within him, as if Lux was hiding or suppressing something. When it was late at night, Jason searched for a good spot to build their tents as the distance between the plateau to their current position increased quite a lot. Jason doubted that anyone would sleep with such a high mana density around them, which was perfect to absorb mana, as they divided their expedition team into 3 groups of 2. In a rotation system, every group would have to do night duty in order to ensure everyone's safety. The Deer siblings were Group 1 while Lin and Lux as the second group. Jason was fine with Malia in his group and couldn't find any problem with that, while Malia seemed slightly nervous. Is it her first time doing something like that? Jason wondered, without understanding a young girl's feelings at all. In the evening, before eating dinner, he practiced once again the Heaven's Hell technique, before he began to feast on the dishes in front of him. Everyone ate together in order to thicken their relationship, but seeing Jason eating so fast, seemingly without chewing, the group became restless with the thought that they would have to absorb mana with an empty stomach. Not eating anything for a few days or a week was not important at the master rank, but everyone liked to eat delicious meals, causing them to glare at Jason, who looked like he wasted precious, tasty food without savoring it at all. Time slowly passed and everyone finished the dinner, while Jason took out more and more cold dishes from his spatial device to continue eating, as his stomach rumbled. Is he still hungry? Everyone looked at Jason in shock, while he ate one dish after another until he was finally satiated. While everyone was shocked, Lux asked, "Are you practicing the 3rd level of the Heaven's Hell technique?" Without any meaning, behind which Jason only nodded his head. Finally understanding the reason for Jason's appetite, everyone nodded their head, before their eyes widened, wasn't your soul awakening only a few months ago? How can your soul energy already be so pure and condensed to endure being formed into a drill? Jennifer exclaimed excitedly while approaching Jason extremely close, causing him to gulp before sweat began to form on his temples. Chapter 203 Treasure by Hydesgrain. Seeing that Jennifer approached him, Jason turned towards her, but he would have never thought that she would barely stop coming closer when their faces were only around 20 centimeters apart from each other. Blushing slightly, Jason's eyes were distracted by the tight combat suit she wore, clearly showing her voluptuous chest. "What is wrong with me?" he thought as he shook his head before clearing his throat in order to stall more time to make up a decent lie. "When I had my soul awakening, my soul energy was already pure and tough. The more time passed, the purer and endurable it became. I think my soul world core is the reason for this." Even though his lie was not the best he could make up, Jason was still distracted by Jennifer, who looked curiously at him without even thinking to distance herself again. Taking a deep breath, Jason noticed Malia next to him glaring at him as if she wanted to murder him any moment. "What?" he mumbled, but Malia only answered him with a HMPF. Before she turned around. He couldn't understand Malia at all when he heard Jennifer cracking up before she stood to walk back to her brother. Sighing deeply, Jason decided to absorb mana for the rest of the day until it was the group's turn for the night duty. He didn't really like to absorb mana actively because he could do many other things in the meantime, but with the surrounding dense mana, Jason couldn't waste such an opportunity. Sitting down in his tent, he instinctively felt the mana around him before he began to slowly absorb it. With time passing, he increased his absorption speed in order to figure out his current limits, with Artemis absorbing the magical ranked mana core while sleeping on his lap. Jason was unsure how much time passed, but he felt much more vigorous than before, as he noticed that he was already halfway through the 3rd adept rank, which astonished him. 1 week. He guessed when he noticed Theo approaching his tent after he barely finished his Heaven's Hell technique practice. Sensing that Jason was already awake, Theo mumbled, "It's your turn," before he went to Malia's tent to tell her the same. Walking out of the tent, he woke up Artemis, who squeezed herself on his shoulder before rubbing her head at his. Afterward, she soared into the sky when he left the tent. It was Saturday, early in the morning, with 19 planned days left for their expedition, and today was the first day they would truly begin. Taking out a huge number of dishes, Jason sat down on a tree trunk, not far away from the tent, as he began to eat. Not long after, Malia sat down next to him, while maintaining a certain distance, as she greeted him hesitantly. She was unsure what to say and let it be in order to say nothing wrong, which could have made their relationship even worse. Even though Malia told herself that she didn't want to have any romantic feeling for Jason, it was not that easy, because he was good-looking, hard-working, and determined to become stronger, while his golden eyes bewitched her additionally. But she knew by looking at Jason, that he regarded her as a good friend or even family, definitely not as love interest, which hurt her more than she thought, and even more when she noticed his behavior when Jennifer approached him. "So annoying," she mumbled subconsciously, causing Jason to look at her with a confused expression, causing her to return his gaze slightly taken aback. "Ah, nothing. I was just thinking about something annoying. Don't mind me. Let's just do our night duty and wake up the others in a few hours. We have a lot to do in the next few days," she hurriedly said, without taking a single breath between her sentences. This led to Jason smiling lightly because he hadn't seen Malia so flabbergasted for some time, as he answered with a simple, "Okay." After this, Malia began to passively absorb mana while staying vigilant, and Jason finished his large breakfast feast before he also actively utilized the passive mana absorption technique. With this, his sub-area passive mana absorption efficiency increased, and he couldn't help but praise his own mana absorption speed. With his mana eyes still activated, there was almost no way for normal beasts to approach them, as long as they weren't able to completely conceal their mana fluctuations, and it was extremely helpful to observe their surroundings, while at the same time utilizing the passive mana absorption technique. With time slowly passing, the first sunray lightened up the valley, as Jason and Malia decided to wake up everyone before they dismantled their tents. After everyone had breakfast and washed up, the others went back into their tent, while Jason and Malia were already finished with everything. Wearing their armors and the weapons attached at the proper place, Jason stared at Malia's wand in order to figure out its composition. He knew that manufacturing wands wasn't done by any basic lifestyle occupation, but the requirements for a wand maker were all 3 basic lifestyle occupations at once, even though the proficiency didn't have to be extremely high. In the end, 3 individuals with each proficient in one field, also called forging, concocting, and inscribing, would work together to manufacture wands. The only issue was that everything had to be in perfect harmony, which was slightly difficult with 3 different individuals working together. Even so, it was still possible and most likely easier than finding a wand maker proficient in all 3 basic occupations. Once I know how they're manufactured, I can make them myself. But how long will it take before Shane or Dahlia will show me the more advanced occupations? Jason wondered when he saw that everyone was already ready to go. Leading everyone through the outskirts, the distance to the highland plateau increased further, while Jason perceived larger beast groups and even a few magical ranked beasts than before. It was already afternoon, almost evening, when Jason noticed something particular that attracted his attention. Halting his steps, the others looked at him in confusion as they perceived his mouth curling slightly up. "What's wrong?" Malia asked, to which Jason answered, "If I'm not wrong, there is a high-quality plant in front of us which is about to ripen," but only a moment later, his prior bright expression darkened as he quietly voiced out, "There are 2 low magical ranked beasts lurking around the plant. But if I'm not wrong, they barely entered the magical rank with 1 or 2 mana drops at most." Saying so, everyone's expression darkened similar to Jason's as they hoped to receive their first treasure to earn more credits. Over the last few hours, their small group encountered a bunch of beasts with all kinds of elemental affinities, while physical, non-elemental beasts seemed to become a rare sight the further they ventured. However, the number of treasures Jason perceived was in the single-digit range, and they were always protected by a bunch of magical ranked beasts. "You said they barely entered the magical rank, right? Should we give it a try? If we work together we can do it by killing one through an assassination." Jennifer's and Lynn's expression brightened up, while Jason's dark expression turned odd. Are they really that desperate for credits? We are talking about magical ranked beasts. Chapter 204, Naivety by Hydesgrain. Jason only remembered his fight against the tiny 2-headed amber lion with Malia and Greg, while thinking carefully about the current situation. Well, it was not that much of a challenge to defeat it with 3 people, right? Shouldn't it be possible with a 6? But upon thinking about it more in depth, the prior fight against the tiny 2-headed amber lion, Jason also remembered that it only had a single drop of mana within its core, which indicated it having reached the magical rank a few days before. Meanwhile, the magical herb Jason saw was guarded by 2 magical ranked beasts that had 2 and 3 mana drops, which was not much more. However, there were 2 beasts, which was the bigger issue. Can we win against them? He asked himself when he noticed the determination and greed flickering in Lynn, Jennifer, and even Lux's eyes. We can try it. In the worst case, we have to use our weapons to injure them and flee. At least we shouldn't die from newly advanced magical ranked beasts. Right as he said so, both Theo and Jennifer took out grade 2 mana Desert Eagles, similar to Greg's weapon. However, theirs were stronger with a mightier recoil, while they similarly used up more mana. While Greg could only injure the tiny 2-headed amber lion because its head was almost severed due to Malia's fragmentation grenades, Jason was sure that the 2 guns within the dear siblings' hands wouldn't be much help against magical ranked beasts with a high defense. The only real question was if the 2 magical ranked beasts had thick defenses or not, as the barely advanced tiny 2-headed amber lion had a rather shallow defense. If Jason were to decide whether or not they would fight against the two magical ranked beasts to obtain the almost ripe magical herb, he would definitely object, but unfortunately, they didn't have any leader and voted. As such, Jason could only helplessly shake his head because even if the remaining votes objected to give the fight a try, it would end in a tie. With Theo accepting Lux's suggestion, Malia and his votes were useless and they immediately began to prepare a plan to fight against the two magical ranked beasts. Before that, Jason and Jennifer went closer towards the two beasts' position to find out what beast races they would have to face and their affinity, which Jason already knew. Even though he couldn't clearly identify what kind of beasts they were, the mana fluctuations circulating through their bodies already told him what he should expect, while he clearly perceived their affinity. The beasts in front of them, behind a large, protruded stone, definitely snaked, with one having a wind affinity while the other one had a fire affinity. Once he and Jennifer, who was also able to see further than others due to a certain technique, enhancing her eyes, sneaked around the large, protruded stone stealthily, two roughly 20-meter-long crystal-horned pythons came into their view. Jason thought that that was normal and nothing special, but Jennifer seemed shocked, as she exclaimed, "Elemental affinity mutation," once she saw the crystal-horned python's scale color that was commonly more leaned towards gray. While he could see their elemental affinity and potential, Jason was rather inexperienced with mutations, and only because Jennifer knew crystal-horned pythons, which were normally at the unblemished rank, she could immediately tell that they mutated. She seemed shocked, but Jason didn't really care about this, as he glanced at the almost ripe plant behind the two pythons, which radiated a faint light gray color. This was nothing special per se, but Jason knew of the plant in front of him and immediately figured out that it was a peak grade 2 herb normally that was universally useful for potions, inscribing solutions and even low evolution serums. "Arios folium yarrow," Jennifer exclaimed, forcing Jason to shut her mouth with his hand, as he glared at her. "Am I the 14-year-old adept rank, or is she?" Jason wondered as he indicated her to walk back. However, while walking back, he was reminded by what he perceived with his mana eyes far away from the Rios folium yarrow that covered his eyesight due to its mana fluctuations in the beginning. What were all this rigid transmuted mana fluctuations? There were even colors radiating from some of them. But even so, they were too weak and too large in number to be normal beasts within the 4-star rift. Otherwise, Malia and the others would have already said something like this, right? Am I becoming paranoid? Jason was confused, but before he could continue to torment his mind, they returned to the group. Jennifer reported everything she saw with shock and greed at the same time, while Jason could only shake his head. Will we really try this? He wondered as the others began to prepare a tactic to kill the two crystal-horned pythons with an elemental mutation. Due to their team's weaker rank and physique, a magical ranked beast with a wind affinity was much worse to fight than a fire ability, because wind elemental attacks were much stronger and faster on a larger distance, while the wind crystal-horned python could envelope itself in order to become faster. As such, they had to kill it first and the fire elemental crystal-horned python afterward. Fire affinities had the strongest area of effects, attack and damage output for basic elements, but at the master rank, every elemental attack at the magical rank could kill them, which decreased the fire affinity slightly. The only issue the group had to face was to prevent the python from spewing out flames or using other large-scale attacks, while their assassination on the wind crystal-horned python had to be perfect. Jason didn't intervene in the discussion and helplessly shook his head in denial while inspecting his 5/7, which he most likely had to use later with his predicament about this whole situation in mind. He was sure that the fight would end up in a devastating loss, because the crystal-horned python's defense was extremely thick, while he also had a bad feeling about their affinity mutations and why they seemed to be so common throughout the whole valley. Almost every beast they met had an elemental affinity, and he knew some of them, which caused him to understand that something within the valley was able to trigger beast mutations, even if he didn't know what or how that was possible. What he previously saw could have been important for this, but when Jason noticed that his team finished their preparations, he saw that only Malia's Nightmare Horse and Lin's Treant were summoned, with the others' soul bonds being withdrawn into their bodies. From what Jason heard, their plan heavily relied on luck, or rather perfect timing with a tinge of luck, which was not really that much of a difference in his opinion. Slowly approaching the large protruding stone, Jason noticed that both crystal-horned pythons slithered on the ground at a relatively large distance from each other, which was the only positive thing he noticed. Reaching the distance of 100 meters, they stopped because they didn't know how advanced the two magical ranked pythons' senses were. Not wanting to be discovered before their attack, Jennifer slowly knocked a pitch-black arrow on the bowstring as she looked at Malia, who nodded, before injecting a vast amount of mana into it. The black arrow began to gleam lightly due to the darkness mana injected, while black-silver runes began to lighten up, creating a thick, pointy layer around the arrow. Meanwhile, Malia used her wand in order to manifest a 5-meter-long water spear, which she compressed to less than half its former size, as sweat pearls formed on her head, indicating the immense focus she had to use up in order to maintain the compressed spear, as she aimed at the green-scaled crystal-horned python, waiting patiently. Time seemed to have stopped, with every second turning into eternity, when Jennifer released her pitch-black arrow, with Malia's compressed water spear following behind. Jason was astonished about their teamwork because he immediately noticed that both aimed at the exact same position when the wind crystal-horned python turned around. Noticing two dangerous objects enveloped in thick mana approaching it, the wind crystal-horned python roared out enraged while it radiated thick tides of mana, pushing Jason a few steps away from his current position, even though he stood more than 100 meters away from it. Chapter 205 Betrayal by Hydesgrain. While being forced to step back, Jason instinctively unholstered his 5.7, but his gaze didn't leave the wind crystal-horned python for a single moment. Using most of its mana to create a compressed gust of wind, the arrow's trajectory was slightly averted, causing it to pierce into the python's long body, while the water spear's velocity decreased, barely tearing out a few scales, missing the targeted area. None of them expected the wind crystal-horned python's reaction to being so fast, as it instinctively saved its own life, even though it had to use up most of its mana. But even without mana, its physique alone was terrifying enough to threaten him. While the red crystal-horned python noticed its companion getting surprised attacked, which caused it to spew a bunch of fireballs towards the small group of humans it immediately perceived. "Fuck!" everyone exclaimed, while Lin and his treant used up more than half of their mana in order to erect a large wall of roots, which barely protected them. Burning through the wall of roots, everyone could hardly avoid the fireballs, which would have burned them alive, as they turned around to run, without hesitating for a single second. It was already hard to imagine the 5 of them defeating one completely healthy magical ranked python with its thick scales, but with the failed assassination, their chances to kill both magical was almost non-existent. To add on, Malia and Jennifer were forced to use up most of their mana, while Lin's reserves were also negligible. With everyone running away, Jason noticed an essential mistake he and their team didn't calculate while thinking about all kinds of possible issues that might occur if their assassination were to fail. "I'm too slow." Gritting his teeth, he noticed that he forgot one of the most important things he should have thought of. How should someone with a 7th adept physique be able to reach the same speed as a master rank? It was impossible, and Jason bit on his lips, as he circulated all of his mana into the weightless steps technique, before ordering Artemis to fly into the sky. Transmitting a thought to Scorpio within his soul world, he immediately felt that his second soul bond entered his mana core, enhancing his physique to the 8th adept rank, which increased his speed by another notch. But even so, the distance between him and his team increased further, while he didn't even dare to imagine how close the magical ranked pythons were, as he already felt death approaching him from behind. Suddenly Jason saw that everyone in front of him unholstered their mana weapons, as they turned their heads, only for their eyes to widen, as they noticed him falling behind. Malia was even more shocked to see so far Jason behind their team, because she completely forgot about him, as she holstered her pistol again, only to see Lin and Lux pointing their weapons towards Jason's direction. Meanwhile, Jennifer's eyes widened while Theo gritted his teeth, only to holster his pistol again, as Jason heard him shouting. "Don't shoot. You may hit Jason." Jason's heart felt warm for a second because Malia, Jennifer, and Theo were considered about him, which was however not really helpful if nothing were to change in the next few seconds. But seeing Lux and Lynn's eyes gleaming, he immediately knew that Theo's words were worthless towards them, while his mana eyes barely perceived the guns being supplied with mana. FCK. Jason cursed in his mind, thinking about all kinds of ways to survive either a barrage of bullets in front of him or the threat of 2 magical ranked pythons from behind him. Why the hell did I even come here? He asked himself, lamenting his stupid decision, as a sudden item he purchased came into his mind. But before he could even do something, Jason saw Lux smiling slyly, as his face turned extremely hideous, causing him to shiver involuntarily, as he instinctively enveloped himself with a thick mana membrane. Additionally, he instinctively summoned Scorpio's exoskeleton that barely reached the late awakened rank. Bang bang bang. Not even a second later, an unimaginable impact flung him back and he could barely hear Malia cry out, "No!" A single bullet pierced straight through his mana membrane and Scorpio's exoskeleton, which barely decreased its velocity, only to be halted by the mana grade 2 black leather armor, which began to drain his almost empty mana further, only for Jason to supply it subconsciously with the mana within the mana sphere bracelet. The golden runes brightened up and Jason's sight blurred, while his abdomen felt as if he was shot by a bazooka. As he fell into a bunch of bushes, crashing into the ground, he spits out blood, as he tried to breathe, which was hardly possible. Not being able to breathe freely due to the impact his abdomen endured, he reminded himself that there were still 2 magical ranked beasts pursuing him, as his gaze turned toward his right side, where he saw the 2 crystal horned pythons' mana fluctuation that seemed to have split up. The weak mana fluctuation, which most likely belonged to the Wind Affinity Python, seemed to approach him slowly, and Jason sensed its unstable fluctuation, indicating a severe injury, which was the only good point he could perceive from his current predicament he was in, as it further slowed down its speed. At least Malia will only have to face one of them, right? He told himself, worrying about her for a moment, before his gaze turned cold, as he thought of Lynn and Lux, which sacrificed him, even though he was already about to die. These F-Seekers, Jason thought, but before he could continue to curse inwardly, he would have to survive. Taking a deep breather once it was possible, he took out a football-sized globe from his spatial device. "Please work," Jason pleaded as he led the mana within his mana sphere bracelet into it, causing it to brighten up before he felt the heat in his surroundings increasing. Hurriedly standing up, the noises he made attracted the wind crystal horned python, that was still more than 20 meters away from it. Snapping out, the distance between the 2 of them decreased within a single moment, shocking Jason, who threw the heating up globe straight towards the python, who opened its mouth, causing the hot globe to enter it unintentionally. "Yes!" he shouted inwardly, as his lips curled upwards, due to the unpredicted, yet fortunate development of the whole fight, if one could even call it like that. Without further ado, Jason's coccyx began to itch, as a 60-centimeter long stinger grew out of it, with which he used to push himself from the ground in order to reach a tree branch above him. The crystal horned python was astonished by the sudden growth of an additional limb from its prey, which caused it to hesitate for a millisecond, which was enough for Jason to exert his weightless step technique once again, to jump from one branch to another. "Please don't let me miss the branch now, alright?" Jason pleaded inwardly, because he never did something like that before, as he calmed himself down as well as possible, while the crystal-horned snake coiled itself around the tree he was currently on, only to break it with its brute force. This caused a thick fountain of blood to ooze out of the serious injury Malia and Jennifer created, which in return led the python to change its strategy. "Fortunately you're already out of mana and injured, right? If your fire elemental friend were to pursue me, I would be dead by now. Thanks for choosing me, and sorry, but you'll die now," Jason said, as the countdown he imagined in his mind turned to 0. Using the mana within his mana sphere bracelet, he supplied his mana grade 2 leather armor to the brim, while he reproduced Scorpio's skeleton forcefully with the usage of nutrition and his remaining mana inside his mana core. Once his leather armor was supplied, he forcefully ejected a large amount of mana only to barely control it in front of him, constructing a crude shield, as the wind crystal-horned python's eyes turned red with its body inflating, before it exploded, devastating the surrounding landscape. Boom. FCK. Chapter 206 Charade by Hydesgrain. Others POVs. Bang bang bang, no. Malia cried out in shock when she finally realized that her own team shot Jason, only for them to save their own life. Her eyes turned wet, as she stopped in her tracks when she saw Jason getting hurled in a bunch of bushes before the two magical ranked pythons split up in order to pursue all of them at once. Suddenly a jolt dragged her out of the train of thoughts she was in, and looking up she saw Jennifer dragging her further ahead, with shock gleaming in her eyes. Did Lux or Lynn kill Jason? Was the only thought in Jennifer's mind, and the trust she had towards them was immediately shattered, replacing it with fear. Would they also sacrifice us, as they did it with Jason? Theo was even more taken aback than Jennifer as he stopped for a moment, to turn around, only to face Lynn with a straight punch in his face. Bastard! He shouted out, before running towards Jennifer and Malia, which were not far away from his current position. Lux continued to run, passing Lynn, who still laid on the ground with blood dripping out of his nostrils. Malia couldn't even think clearly anymore, while her soulbond laid next to her, which she barely noticed. Theo didn't think for long as he lifted Malia only to throw her on top of the nightmare horse before they rushed forward. Taking a few high-grade tear gases, illusionary, poison and other grenades from their storage devices, Theo and Jennifer used their remaining mana to ignite all of them before throwing them to the front. Activating when they passed them, the two hoped that the red crystal-horned python would be distracted, while Theo had barely time to think about Jason, who was alone inside the 4-star rift, pursued by a magical ranked beast, while they could work together in order to survive. I can't call that working together. Theo thought, sighing deeply, as he remembered Lux and Lynn shooting towards Jason, without hesitating for a single second, causing goosebumps to spread all over his body. FCK. He exclaimed, which was heard by Jennifer next to him, who was similarly frustrated not only about Jason, who was most likely dead, but also that her own team killed him without faltering at all. Lynn gathered himself, while his mind was working on 150%, as his soulbond finally reappeared in his soul world when he decided to follow Lux, who was already further ahead. He couldn't rely on Lux, but both of them shot at Jason, which led him to think that they were alike. They would both sacrifice others in order to survive, while the dear siblings and Malia wouldn't do something like this at all. If he were to remain with them, they would probably exile him, which was even worse than staying with Lux, who was by far the strongest out of the group. With the whole lot of grenades covering the surrounding, two groups formed out of the previous Unite's expedition team on the second day of their mission. Lux noticed Lynn following him, which didn't bother him at all, because his complete plan was destroyed thanks to the prior accident, which caused him to sigh in regret. Well, in the end, it doesn't really matter. Let's begin the harvest a few days earlier. Thinking about Lynn, his expression brightened up, as a cruel smile appeared on his face, as his facial expression turned extremely unsightly and cruel. You'll be my first testing object. Adjusting his direction to run further from the others, Lux's speed increased in order to widen the distance with the others, while his cruel expression turned even worse as he was finally able to put aside the disguise he was forced to maintain over the last few months. With this, his whole presence changed, while a thick aura of death enveloping him, as he summoned the 3 unblemished skeletons, with 4 undead low-evolved ranked canine beasts next to them. Get him! Turning around, Lux stared straight into Lynn's eyes that were instinctively filled with a distinct fear he never felt before, as he shrieked out in fear. Pitch black. Lynn thought, shocked, as he saw Lux's eyes that didn't have any trace of brown or even white left. There was nothing at all. Barely summoning his treant, Lynn was immediately enveloped in the distinct reeking death mana radiating from the small mass of undead that charged at him with a terrifying speed, as the skeleton warrior took on the tree ant head-on with the 4 mid-evolved canine undead beasts supporting it. Meanwhile, the skeleton archer and assassin faced Lin, who shivered in terror, as multiple arrows flew straight towards him, which he blocked with his own daggers, as the skeleton assassin appeared in front of him. Exchanging a few blows, they were equally powerful, and with his martial art techniques exerted, he slowly began to take over the advantage, as he tensed up when he noticed something appearing behind him, as his body stiffened, with a fountain of blood spurting out of a deep, bloody cut that suddenly appeared on Lin's throat. "Don't forget that I'm still there. Be honored that I allowed you to be my first creation." These were the last words Lin heard, from behind, before his eyes dimmed, with his remaining life force leaving his body. With Lin's death, the tree ant screamed out in anguish, as it went berserk, shattering the mid-evolved canine skeletons, before rushing towards Lin's body. "You're still alive. Let's change that," Lux said, without averting his gaze from Lin, as all of his 7 soul bonds charged at the tree ant at the same time, ripping it apart, without showing any mercy to the tree ant that suffered physically but even more so mentally, as the soul bond contract had been severed. Looking at Lin's corpse, Lux smiled brightly, and if his prior expedition teammate were to see him, they would be horrified, asking themselves how someone was able to change so much within a few minutes. Meanwhile, the deer siblings and Malia on top of the nightmare horse continued to run through the forest, with their only goal to run further away from the fire elemental crystal horned python. They could still hear further behind them, roaring in rage and pain due to the high-grade grenades which caused several different types of pain and other effects. Malia, meanwhile, was comparable to a lifeless person because she was still thinking about Jason, without any intention to come out of her trance, while Theo threw grenade after grenade throughout the forest, trying to distract the fire elemental crystal horned python even further. Suddenly, far away from the current position, they heard an extremely loud explosion, after which the fire elemental crystal horned python stiffened before it halted its pursuit, only to look back in shock. Theo noticed their chance as their speed increased further in order to widen the distance between them and the python, only to notice that their pursuer ignored them to slither towards the direction where the explosion sound came from. "Please be alive," Malia hoped, with tears streaming down her cheeks as she sat on her nightmare horse, barely being able to stay seated. Chapter 207, Death's Door by Hydesgrain. Jason's POV. Blasted away by the huge shockwave the explosion caused, Jason's body smashed into a large tree, where his short fly through the air was forcefully halted. Crack! Jason could only hear a faint crack from his upper back, as searing pain spread throughout his whole body, as he fell on the ground, barely able to stay conscious. *T. I can't stand up. This explosion was huge. It should be dead, right? Forcefully smiling, he tried to stand up, only to notice that it was not impossible, when his energy left him, which forced him to slump down on the ground before he collapsed. Artemis, who observed everything from above, dived down towards him, worriedly checking if he was fine. Through the thick soul connection, she figured out that Jason's right shoulder was broken, which worried her as she noticed a few broken potions within the belt next to 3 intact potions with different colors. She didn't know what they could do, but having seen Jason and other students using them occasionally to replenish their mana, hasten up their regeneration process, and calm down from excessive stress, she carefully took them out with her talons of the belt before crudely opening the lid with her beak. Overturning Jason on his back with the help of her horns, Artemis noticed his deathly pale face without any blood circulation within it at all, causing her to act even faster, as she picked up the intact potion with her beak up while trying to shed too much of its liquid before she stood on his chest. Carefully tilting her head, the liquid within the potion dripped into Jason's mouth that was barely opened, while more than half of it streamed along his cheeks. After the first potion was emptied, Artemis checked her connection with Jason once again, and once she figuring out that his life was not in danger anymore, she averted her gaze to see his pale face that looked slightly rosier. She felt immediate relief. Taking the next 2 potions out, Artemis slowly poured them out above Jason's mouth. After each intact potion was emptied, she didn't know what else to do in order to help him, as she remembered from Jason's memories that a smooth mana circulation was one of the most important things for first aid help, with the highest priority being healing reagents. As such, Artemis tried to access Jason's mana circulation, which was hardly possible, because his mana core was completely dried up, while the passive mana circulation of his sub-area barely helped him in his current situation. Because Jason had barely any mana left, Artemis tried to inject him with her ice-transmuted mana, in order to circulate it within him to hasten up his recuperation process, which however decreased the temperature of his body by a few degrees. Suddenly the green-bluish, torn exoskeleton vanished, with an equal-colored mana circle appearing next to Artemis, only to see Scorpio emerging from it. Even though the exoskeleton around Jason was completely torn apart before it dissolved when his little soul bond left the mana core. However, Scorpio seemed completely fit, while his outer appearance looked shredded, and the cause of this was that Jason used his last remaining mana and nutrition within his body in order to save his second soul bond's life, while forcefully ejecting a large wall of mana from the mana sphere bracelet before the explosion occurred. Scorpio's mana core was still filled, and it did exactly the same as Artemis, by injecting its mana into Jason, to hasten up his regenerating process. If Jason knew of his two soul bonds trying to circulate their ice and poison transmuted mana within his mana veins, he would prevent them with any costs, because they could kill him this way, which his naive soul bonds weren't aware of. Suddenly Jason began to writhe in pain, while he was still unconscious, which caused both Artemis and Scorpio to notice that something was wrong, as they halted with their mana injection and circulation, as Jason's body began to heat up, increasing the surrounding temperature by a few degrees. With this warmth, his pain eased up, as Jason's mana veins began to accept Artemis and Scorpio's mana because it was suddenly cleansed from the cold and lethal poison. Unbeknownst to the two soul bonds and Jason, who was still unconscious, the Black Origin Flame sensed the perilous situation its contractor was in, causing it to leave the soul world by instinct, only to spread its flame throughout Jason's body, cleansing him from the dangerous transmuted mana while soothing his pain. Artemis sensed the Black Origin Flame's existence within Jason, which caused her to hesitate for a moment before remembering that Jason was still in danger. She approached the heated-up body in order to inject her mana once again, while Scorpio did the same. A few minutes passed, with the three soul bonds working together in harmony in order to save Jason's life, while their surrounding atmosphere changed between heat, cold, and a poisonous touch. Jason was completely dried up from mana and nutrition because he also had to replenish Scorpio's destroyed exoskeleton multiple times at once, causing him to feel extremely exhausted when he woke up from a dream that seemed to take an eternity. With his golden eyes wide open, he noticed that he was not in his bed at the Flays house because he stared through a bunch of lush leaves into a blue sky with clouds partially blocking sun rays brightening up the area around him. His body felt as if someone shook it heavily while burning, freezing and poisoning him at the same time, and trying to stand up. Jason wanted to push himself from the ground with his hands, only to notice his right hand giving in. "Ah!" Jason shouted out, as a searing pain circulated through his right shoulder, causing him to remember everything that happened before he lost his consciousness. "Is everyone okay?" He immediately asked himself as he looked around, only to notice Scorpio and Artemis sleeping soundly next to him. Scorpio's exoskeleton was partially torn apart, but he seemed fine, even though his mana was completely dried up. Suddenly, Jason noticed that Artemis' mana was also completely dried up, and he predicted something, which was related to his dream. "Thanks," he said, picking up Artemis to hold her in his arm while summoning a green-bluish mana circle in which Scorpio vanished. "You two did a good job." When he said that, he felt his soul world suddenly increasing by a few degrees, causing Jason to enter it subconsciously, where he saw his Black Origin Flame flickering violently. Thinking back of his dream, with him heating up, almost as if he was burning, Jason figured out that it was most likely not a dream but rather reality. "Thank you too." Looking around his soul world, he noticed something particular. Not only thickened his soul connection with the Black Origin Flame, but somehow Artemis' soul connection seemed somewhat similar to Scorpio's, only that it was thicker. "We already established a fortified soul conjunction," he noticed, shocked, as he remembered that he barely knew Scorpio and Artemis for a few months. How can I build another fortified Sol conjunction this fast? Is it because I raised them, or why am I faster than others by dozens of years? Even Till took years to form a fortified Sol conjunction with his radiant star Eagle. Pondering about these questions, Jason didn't know a particular answer, but he was almost sure that an important fact for his thick connection with his soul bonds was his soul world. I know that my soul world is special, but is that really the reason? It can't possibly be. Another few unsure factors could be his personality, as he cared about all of them, while he wanted them to become stronger, or simply that he was like their mother while he would sacrifice his lives for them if it was required, which his soul bonds already figured out. Leaving his soul world, Jason stood up with great difficulties, while his right shoulder hurt like hell, as his body began to shiver. Can't I have some time to recuperate? He thought while turning around, where his mana eyes perceived the fire elemental crystal horned python slithering towards his direction. Even if the crystal horned python was still extremely far away, with his current condition, he could hardly run away, as cold sweat poured down his back. Chapter 208 Greeting, Mother Wolf. By Hydesgrain. Cursing in his mind, Jason didn't have any time to waste, as he turned into the exact opposite direction from the fire elemental python, while Artemis was still sleeping soundly in his arm, slowing him down, while his shoulder burned like hell, due to Artemis' weight. Artemis. Can't you wake up? Please. It's already painful to even run with my shoulder, he quietly pleaded, but his words couldn't be heard by Artemis, as she continued to sleep soundly. Sighing deeply, Jason exerted his weightless step movement technique while gritting his teeth to endure his pain spreading from his shoulder. His current position was definitely not suitable to run away from any high-ranked beast, but there was one thing he could do for sure with his current capabilities. Hiding. With Artemis' low mana fluctuations caused by overexerting her mana and my used-up mana, it should be quite difficult to perceive us. If I use the concealment technique I learned in addition, it will be even more difficult, right? He was still extremely tired, powerless, and his whole body ached because he smashed into the tree thanks to the overwhelming explosion a few minutes ago, but forcing himself to stay awake, Jason had to find a better place to hide. Rushing past a few lush trees and bushes, Jason suddenly halted his steps, before he turned around in order to squeeze himself through a particular bush as his mana eyes perceived something. It was extremely risky because it could either save him or cause his death, as he saw a large hole behind the bush which he entered without hesitating anymore. With his mana eyes, he perceived faint mana fluctuations radiating from something he estimated to be a hole, while further below he sensed weak fluctuations that came most likely from awakened beasts. However, even though the mana radiating from them was extremely weak, the radiating color Jason perceived was a thick green, indicating the potential of a magical ranked beast, which was the reason for him to jump into the hole. Even though the fire elemental crystal horned python was a magical ranked beast, it barely reached this rank thanks to it undergoing a mutation, and it would never challenge other magical ranked beasts if it was not necessary because it was suicidal. After jumping into the hole he identified as a den, Jason felt his shoulder burning even more than before, while Artemis was forcefully woken up from her slumber. Looking around, he suddenly saw 3 small dark green furred wolf cubs in front of him, gazing at him confused, as they expected their parents to come back. Smiling lightly, Jason used all his remaining mana to supply his golden eyes with it while trying to show that he didn't want to harm them. Bewitched by his golden eyes, the dark, green-furred wolf cubs, he identified as tornado wolf cubs, didn't make a single sound as they approached him quietly. "Thank you," he told himself, as he exerted the concealment technique he barely knew in order to suppress his mana fluctuations even more. Seeing the magical ranked python halting in its track, his heart thumped loudly as he stopped to breathe. "Just go," Jason shouted in his mind as the crystal-horned python slowly slithered away from the bush he squeezed through. Sighing in relief, he didn't even notice the 3 furballs sniffing at him in interest. Stroking them subconsciously, Jason was still looking through the soil with his mana eyes in order to figure out when to leave the wolf den he jumped in a few seconds ago. Suddenly he heard Artemis screeching out, which surprised him. Turning around to her worriedly, he saw her quarreling with the tornado wolf cubs, which were currently at the awakened rank because she also wanted to be stroked. Averting his gaze towards his left hand, Jason noticed that he stroked one of the wolf cubs, while the others also wanted to be cuddled, causing them to approach his other hand. Trying to lift it, Jason felt extremely uncomfortable, and it was almost impossible to do without him feeling an almost unbearable aching coming from his broken shoulder, which caused him to inspect his current situation closer. Scanning through his own body, he sighed in relief, as he took out a handful of glimmering potions. Gulped down the potions after a short moment, Jason immediately felt the effect, invigorating his body while at the same time supplementing him with necessary nutrition. Because of the tornado wolf cub's gentle behavior, Jason forgot that they would be magical ranked beasts once they reached maturity, and even more important was that they had parents that would come back soon. However, Jason seemed to be completely oblivious to this fact. After gulping down the potions, Jason took out a few dishes to eat because he felt extremely hungry, almost as if he were to starve any moment if he wouldn't eat immediately. Unfortunately, he was interrupted by 3 dark green bodies and a pure white Artemis jumping towards the food he took out from his storage device, as the 4 beasts landed on his chest, throwing him on the back. Shouting out in pain, his heavy chest was immediately freed from the 4 beasts' weight, as Jason glared at all of them. Are all of you my soul bonds now or what? Can't your parents feed you? Artemis is already a glutton and too much for me to handle. Sighing deeply, Jason couldn't help but feel slightly regretful that he even entered the wolf den. Nevertheless, he had to acknowledge that surviving the crystal-horned python's wrath would have been much more of a hassle. Nodding his head, he took out a few dishes because the puppy eyes of the tornado wolf cubs made him weak. You 3 helped me to survive, let me give you a reward, okay? Jason said as he took out a few raw steaks he purchased in Syro City in order to make a barbecue on their journey through the 4-star rift when they had time and the opportunity to do so. Unfortunately, the whole expedition was now somewhat chaotic, and instead of grilling and eating the steaks by himself, he could also feed them to the wolf cubs, who saved his life, even if they weren't aware of the effect the cubs and their parents' smell had. Feeding the 3 tornado wolf cubs, Artemis stared daggers at him, causing him to chuckle lightly, as he took out another steak and a magical ranked mana core at the same time to let her decide what she wanted to eat. Taking the steak with her beak, Jason stored the magical ranked mana core away, as he took out convenience food which he heated up slightly with his black origin flame before he scarfed down one plate after another. After a few plates, he took out a few more steaks to give them the wolf cubs and Artemis, and when Jason was done eating, he felt full of energy thanks to the food he ate and the potion's effects. The pain in his shoulder already lessened slightly, even though it was still extremely painful. Trying to stand up, Jason suddenly noticed 4 furballs laying on his lap and legs. Am I a bed or something like that? He mumbled as his body stiffened when killing intent enveloped his whole body. Turning his head, he saw 2, 3-meter-tall dark green furred wolves entering the wolf den, only to bare their teeth at the sight of him, while both released their killing intent towards him. Oh, FCK, greetings Mother Wolf. Chapter 209 Escaped by Hydesgrain. Seeing the 2 adult tornado wolves at the magical rank in front of him, cold sweat poured down his back, while their killing intent tried to inflict fear within Jason. Gulping down his saliva, he took a glance at the sleeping cubs and Artemis as an idea appeared in his mind. Should I? No, I can't. Even if I do so it would be useless. Shaking his head, Jason immediately disregarded the idea of kidnapping one of the tornado wolf cubs in order to survive, because it would end up in bad blood with each other, which was not what both of them most likely wanted, and it was unsure if he would even survive his current dilemma like this. Thinking about all kinds of solutions, Jason's head seemed to smoke, and in the end, there was no perfect solution for his current situation. He was too slow to flee from 2 magical ranked beasts and not strong enough to fight them. Abducting the sleeping tornado cubs would only worsen the situation long term while he would maybe survive for a short time. However, the worst was that Artemis just continued to sleep, as if the killing intent around them was nothing, while his back was completely drenched in cold sweat. Within a second, Jason used his newly established fortified soul conjunction with Artemis to forcefully wake her up, which was retorted with an annoying screeching from her, as she opened her eyes. Standing up, she looked around, only to see the adult tornado wolves radiating a dense killing intent in front of them, which shocked her, as she stepped back, only to bump into Jason. "Now you're awake, Jason said as a joke, trying to ease up the tension around them while staring at the adult tornado wolves that didn't move a single inch. They were equally shocked to see two low-ranked beings infiltrating the den, which not a single beast around them ever dared to do because they wouldn't be able to endure the wrath of two magical ranked beasts at the same time. As such, the current situation was uncommon, while the mother tornado wolf was only glad that nothing happened to her cubs, who seemed to sleep next to the bipedal being, without being on guard against possible attacks. From the tornado wolf's perspective, this could only have a few certain reasons: either her cubs were manipulated, tricked by an illusion, sedated from poison, or there was no threat from the beings that infiltrated the den. After scanning through her cubs' mana cores, she couldn't detect any poison, while the first two reasons were quite difficult to figure out. But even so, the wolf mother felt relieved, causing her to decrease the killing intent she released by a large margin, allowing Jason to take a deep breath. "They won't attack me with the cubs next to me, right?" Jason figured out, and this was most likely the only positive aspect in his current position. Suddenly an idea formed in his mind, as he remembered something important about mother beast instincts and that they knew if their cub was in danger. As such, Jason tried to go all in. Slowly grabbing one of the wolf cubs with his hand, he could only hear two loud growls in front of him, as the killing intent increased once again. However, Jason couldn't care less at the moment, because his shoulder burned like fire, as he picked one of the tornado wolf cubs up from his leg in order to lay it next to his leg to free it. The other two cubs laid across his other leg, and he did the same with the two of them. Yawning, one of the tornado wolf cubs seemed to wake up, only to fall back into a deep slumber, which caused Jason to smile lightly. "They don't even know that I'm about to die, huh? At least some emotional support would be nice," he lamented while maintaining his smile until both legs were finally freed. Meanwhile, Artemis couldn't really do anything to help because her talons were too sharp to grab the tornado wolf, which would hurt them and wake them up, even if she dulled them. As such, Jason had to do everything by himself, and after his legs were free, he changed his current position, only to hear the growling next to him becoming louder. The adult tornado wolf approached him, causing goosebumps to spread all over his body, while he tried to be as genuine as possible. He didn't want to hear the tornado cubs, and picking them up once again to lay them carefully in front of him, he caressed them one after another, which caused them to turn on their back, revealing their belly towards him. Caressing it, Jason suddenly sensed Artemis' jealousy, as she approached him from behind, demanding carcasses. Frowning, Jason couldn't help but mumble, "Are you a diva or something like that? We might be torn apart any moment and you want to be caressed." Before he noticed that he could freely breathe, without any killing intent enveloping him and Artemis. Looking at the two matured tornado wolves, he noticed that the gaze turned less hostile, and Jason stepped back from the three cubs in order to give their parents time to inspect them to figure out if there were any injuries. If his knowledge was not completely wrong, the intelligence of beasts at the magical rank was not worse than that of average adults, and Jason relied on this information in order to survive. Furthermore, showing too much fear would worsen his situation, even if he couldn't help himself in the beginning, because he was too flustered. As such, he thought about multiple magical ranked beasts' habits, and only a minority hunted for fun, while most of them only killed beasts in order to protect their children, territory, or eat something. Before he utilized his plan, he saw the male tornado wolf dragging a large beast corpse into the den, while a thick scent of blood permeated the air, telling Jason that they had more than enough food for the time being. Slowly retreating, Artemis finally noticed how serious their situation was, as she similarly stepped back. After inspecting their cubs, the mother tornado wolf's gaze averted back to Jason and Artemis, before she picked up 2 cubs with her more before the other tornado wolf took the remaining cub. "Can we go?" Jason thought, as Artemis suddenly flapped with her wings, landing on his right shoulder, causing him to almost shout out in pain. "You!" Gnashing his teeth, he held out his left arm for Artemis to step it, before she slowly paddled towards his left shoulder while expressing her being sorry through the fortified soul conjunction. Stepping slowly back, he wanted to prevent doing any sound, and only when the 2 of them left the wolf den for good, Jason sighed in relief, before looking around if anything dangerous was nearby them. To Artemis, he instructed, "Stay with me for now. I don't know if there are any flying beasts around us. We lost our team and are without anyone who is capable enough to defeat unblemished beasts." Thinking about all kinds of possibilities, Jason's shoulder that still hurt like hell with each step he took was the only thing that forcefully held him back from being lost in thought because he had to find a good hideout in order to recuperate. The forest was too dangerous because he could see high mana fluctuations from everywhere and was as such not a good place for him to recuperate from his injury. Suddenly he remembered something. Wasn't there something with low mana fluctuation far behind the flower, nearby the hillside where our assassination failed? Jason wondered, and if his memory was not completely wrong, he couldn't see any high-graded mana fluctuations from there. He didn't feel comfortable about the place, but Jason felt that it was the only area that was remotely safe if anything within the 4-star rift could be called like this. Chapter 210 Cave by Hydesgrain. Looking around, he tried to find similar areas like the one he previously saw nearby the mutated crystal-horned python's habitat because he wanted to avoid being too close with other high-ranked beasts. Scanning everything with his mana eyes, he could perceive many mana fluctuations from unblemished beasts and even magical ranked beasts around him, which caused Jason to feel overwhelmed by the sensation of being extremely weak. He hadn't felt this for quite some time because he became one of the strongest in his school, but now his whole existence was on the line. A single mistake and everything was over. Jason knew that, and he decided to search for the best path back to the mutated crystal-horned python's habitat, because of 2 important facts. First, the wind elemental python was dead, blown into smithereens, while the second reason was that not a single high-ranked beast should be there because the fire elemental crystal-horned python was still searching for him, and he hadn't seen any other beasts in the surrounding. He saw the crystal-horned python slithering past the wolf den without coming back, and it would most likely take some time before it would give up its pursuit, which caused Jason to feel like a ray of hope emerged within him. As long as he found a safe area to recuperate and increase his soul energy in order to store Artemis, everything would become much easier for him. With the fortified soul conjunction, his survival rate would increase further and the ray of hope within Jason widened slightly. While finding his way back to the crystal python habitat, he looked out for other hideouts that might be even safer than the one he presumed to find, but there was nothing, which soured Jason's mood slightly. At least it will be better than sleeping inside the forest without anyone on night duty, right? He thought as he noticed the sun descending slowly. Hastening up his steps, Jason's mana eyes were working at full speed, trying to maintain a perfect observance, while giving his best to avoid any kinds of high-ranked beasts. Half an hour later, he finally reached the large stone that protrudes out of the ground, with a smile emerging on his face, as he noticed that the ripened plant was still there without any signs of other beasts or even the fire elemental crystal-horned python in his surrounding. For a short moment, he felt his greed emerging from deep within him, as he looked at the almost ripened plant in front of him, which he immediately suppressed. Even if he wanted to, it would be suicidal to take the ripened plant with him now, because the python would be able to detect his scent once he picked up the herb, which would additionally release spores, attaching to his clothes. As such, Jason disregarded this opportunity, because he didn't want to provoke the crystal-horned python needlessly, as he walked towards the uncountable number of colors he saw thanks to his mana eyes. They have to be ores, materials, or something like that, right? He asked himself, because these colors radiating around pointy-shaped things hadn't moved for the time he fled from the python pair, which was already some time ago. As such, it had to be inanimate objects, which enlightened him, causing his steps to hasten up even more. The closer he came, the more colors he perceived, while the mana fluctuations around there seemed to be high and low at the same time. However, this wasn't the main point, because almost all of these mana fluctuations contained elemental transmuted mana, which made him curious. Even though his shoulder hurt like hell while walking, Jason increased his speed even further, while Artemis decided to fly a few meters above him due to the uncomfortable sensation she had to endure with Jason's fast strides, as she was forced to remain squeezed on his shoulder. But even Artemis was attracted to some of these mana fluctuations, causing her to subconsciously fly towards them, only for her to see something she hated the most. When Jason squeezed himself through the last bush that obstructed his view, he saw a huge hillside with a large cavern entrance in front of him, which was Artemis' reason to look so frustrated. As a flying beast, the thing she hated the most was having her freedom restricted. She didn't mind staying within Jason's soul world for weeks, which was already boring, but when she was outside she wanted to soar through the sky. Even the wolf den was already too much for her, and now Jason had to enter a cavern. Artemis didn't like it, which she transmitted to Jason, who could only smile apologetically. "Well, either come with me or stay outside. You know I can't order you, but please know that everything outside the cavern is extremely dangerous," he only said, trying to put on a disguise as if he didn't care about Artemis' choice while entering the cavern entrance with careful steps. His mana eyes distracted him extremely, with colors ranging from black to dark green and all kinds of mana fluctuations from thin to thick, low to high quality, and so on. It was almost painful, and if he wasn't proficient with enduring pain through his eyes, Jason would have already deactivated his mana eyes, which could end up devastating, once he missed something dangerous. He was in a 4-star rift and everything could kill him, and he was aware of this fact. A little bit pain was nothing if he wanted to survive here, and he only noticed Artemis following him, as she intentionally landed on his right shoulder, which caused Jason to grit his teeth in pain in order to prevent crying out loudly. After she was satisfied, she immediately changed towards his left shoulder, where she stayed as if nothing happened. She really became a diva, Jason thought, suppressing the desire to lecture her because his full attention was required somewhere else. Walking deeper into the cave, he noticed tunnels at the end of the entrance, leading in 4 different directions. 2 tunnels were extremely large with a height of more than 10 meters, while the remaining outer tunnels had a height of 3 meters at most. This difference might be important for him to decide which path to choose, because most high-ranked beasts were rather large. But this didn't apply for all of them, and the mutated crystal-horned python was one example, while he already saw more than enough smaller magical ranked beasts within the valley. As such, it didn't really matter which tunnel he took. All of them radiated dense mana, with hundreds of colored pointy-shaped things further down the tunnels. The only advantageous fact Jason made overjoyed was that he couldn't see a single moving beast further below with his mana eyes, while he saw many rare colors through the soil, shocking him. "Where the hell did I land?" he wondered, as his sight was obstructed due to the absence of a light source. Holding out his left hand, Artemis immediately figured out what he wanted to do, causing her to screech out in anger, as a black flame appeared in it, lightening up the surrounding. Clearly seeing his surroundings, it was the first time for Jason to see something like this, as he saw one of the objects that radiated a color protruding out of the soil. "Is that a crystal?" Single quote.